Everyone, I decided to do my final business presentation on the Rasmussen Library, the main library on UAF's Trottietta campus. So, Today I'll go over the introduction of Rasmussen Library and why I chose it, the organizational behavior analysis covering chapters 3, 7, 10, 15, and 18 from the textbook, my critical evaluation, my recommendations, and finally the conclusion. So, why did I choose Rasmussen Library? Well, I work there currently, and I have a pretty good idea of the structure. I'm also planning to become a librarian, and I wanted to take this project as an opportunity to research more about them and what my career will look like. Libraries fall in the education industry. The U.S. Bureau of Labor describes the education industry as specialized establishments that provide instruction and training in a wide variety of subjects. So this mostly applies to schools, and since Rasmussen is part of a university, it definitely falls in this category. It gets a little bit more gray when it comes to public libraries. And so, like I said, Rasmussen is an academic or university library, but it does also function kind of as a public library for the people of Fairbanks. It doesn't give out library cards, but the spaces in the library are available for anyone with or without cards. And definitely a small employee range. What I have on screen is maybe an overestimate. There are usually about 15 to 20 staff at any given time inside the library. I think overall there's about 50, but very small staff range. And it also has a circular structure, especially because almost all institutions are structured around the chancellor on the university. And if you'll notice, the very small employee range, there are multiple different departments that interplay. There's circulation on the main floor, there's research, there's interlibrary loans, there's spending, and a lot of those, like I said, they interplay. If you'll notice, I didn't say the sixth floor, the SSC, or the archives. Those are functionally different organizations. They have different goals and completely different staffing as well. So I will not be including those in this talk. So let's get into attitudes and job satisfaction from chapter 3 of the textbook. So uh, Rasmussen definitely has a very high organizational commitment, and that's how much an employee identifies with an organization's goals and wants to be a part of it. When I was interviewing one of my coworkers, she said, "Well, I enjoy working here because libraries are a public good. I just feel good when I come to work." And this gets into Leah Gotham and Nancy Fulborn's paper, The High Cost of Doing Good. And they explored why social care workers earn less than other professions. And they specifically called out libraries and education, as in like teaching. They mentioned that this is likely in part due to employee personalities. And so the employees in social work jobs are more likely to have this intrinsic motivation that to help people, and that same personality trait will hinder them from pushing for higher wages. It is also likely in part due to sexism, since more women are going to work social work, social care jobs, I should say. And while having this self-motivation is great, it's fantastic, it can actually harm in terms of earning. They calculated about a 20% decrease, roughly $10,000 less annually than other comparable jobs. Despite all this, there's definitely a high job satisfaction at Rasmussen. If you're a full-time employee, you get the state benefits since, it's a university library and it's government funded. For students, it's very flexible and students have a very high perceived organizational support. Our supervisors are willing to work with us to get a good schedule, and students are allowed to do homework during work. There is pretty low empowerment in terms of policy at the lower you go in the hierarchy. So, students are not really going to have a lot of say on, the official policy of the library. But as long as they have an active voice, which the culture encourages, um, it's possible. It's not impossible. It's just unlikely. And because of the high perceived organizational support, Rasmussen also has a very, very low turnover rate. It's pretty much the only reason they have turnover at all is because students are consistently, graduating. And so, why are these employees so motivated to work and say that they love their job? The thing I noticed the most is Hertzberg's two-factor theory. So Rasmussen has great hygiene, it's very flexible, it has friendly coworkers, and it has the promise of long-term promotions. And I didn't include pay because I actually quit my old job for less pay to work here. But their atmosphere more than makes up for this lack of pay. They also have great motivators. They have recognition, helping others, and praise. So any one thing that one person does, it helps the entire team because it's so small. This also ties into self-concordance theory, or the degree to which people's reasons for pursuing goals are consistent with their interests and core values. And so there are actually a lot of ex-food service industry workers at Rasmussen. And so I think there's this innate desire to want to help people is present throughout the library. There's also a lot of social learning, and that's essentially just learning by observation. People are very willing to help and teach new employees and welcome them into the culture with open arms. The biggest thing I've noticed is that there is a lot of goal setting and management by objectives specifically. Everyone has a large scale task, and that's shelf reading. So we go through the millions of books in the library, and everyone gets a small section and they scan them all, make sure they're all there, and they make sure they're in the right order. And so while it's a huge, seemingly impossible task, everyone does their little section and then everything gets done and it's great. And for the most part, this job has a very low physical and mental strain. So most employees are not victim to burnout because, again, the organization and the individuals are willing to help you through any problems that you may be having. And so let's get into work teams. The culture at Rasmussen is very standardized. There are, small aspects of personalization, but there is a correct procedure. At the end of the day, this task needs to get done with these parameters. How you get there maybe isn't as important, but the task needs to get done. And this gets into Paul Swanson's paper, The Culture of Resilience. And he explores how the role of the libraries have changed post-pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic to be specific. And he introduces this idea of resilience or the ability to adapt to changes effectively. And so, in order to keep up with, the digitizing world and the demands that COVID placed on them, more formalization and standardization actually occurred. And this is because, it's too difficult to support a team that is doing things differently. Standardization prevents tasks from being repeated. It allows everyone to be on the same page, and it actually boosts communication. And so you definitely see that within the current Rasmussen team. And like I was saying before, Rasmussen has cross-functional teams. It would not be able to function without them. There's a very low number of employees. And so we have them working in and definitely with other departments constantly to make sure that everything is running smoothly. And there is also a multi-team system when necessary. It's not uncommon for Rasmussen to work with the SSC or the archives if they need help. This was especially true definitely during COVID and when the library was getting remodeled and books were having to be moved from every single shelf. And the reason that this team works so well is because there's very selective hiring processes. So since there's so little employees, you need to be specific with the people you're hiring. You need to ensure that they have the same motivation style, that everyone will get along, and that there are no gaps in skills. And there's this culture based on trust and cohesion with this. I think one drawback is that there are little incentives. Again, everything is so small that it has a palpable impact. And so, showing someone special attention or, giving them a reward and not other people will, I think, harm the culture more than hurt. And so it's this aspect of conflict management as well. And organizational structure. So, like I said before, Rasmussen has a circular structure, and it follows this hierarchy with the chancellor in the middle, spreading his views out to everyone else, and then the vice chancellor, supporting that, and then the library director implementing it, head managers, and then supervisors and students at the bottom. And so the lower you are in the hierarchy, the more narrow that span of control is. And I think everyone is aware of the power distance and comfortable with it for the most part. You do see a little bit of tension with supervisors because that rung of the ladder is usually the people who have actually worked there the longest and know the most, and yet they have some of the least say in the library policy. And again, after COVID, you see this fundamental structure being questioned, COVID and the digital age. And it gets into Elmore's third space theory, where he explores that, libraries need to be more than just archives. They need to be community spaces. They need to be center for learning, centers for creativity. And he also delves into another idea of libraries needing to compete with other businesses like bookstores. For example, Barnes and Nobles has a cafe. And so you could theoretically take a book, read it, and put it back on the shelf. And so libraries need to find a new function to keep up. And even if you don't agree with the idea, the fundamental structure of libraries are under attack. We don't get a lot of funding. All of it goes to subscriptions to databases. So there are no books being purchased by the library for the library. They're all gifts from others or, additional funding. And finally, work-life balance. I think Rasmussen has a fantastic work-life balance, and one of the main things that they do is because they encourage boundaries. They specifically encourage students leaving work at work, and turning off, all email notifications. It's very limited contact if you're not in work or with somebody in person. And this does get worse in higher tiers of the hierarchy. Like I said, it's very small. There's not a lot of people who can cover for you if you need to take a day off if you are not a student. But with, this worse work-life balance, there is also a pretty handsome pay raise. So, it's a trade-off. Rasmussen also has pretty high job security. Again, very low turnover because there's a shortage of librarians. And there's also not a lot of people working there. They can't really afford to fire people. There's low wellness opportunities because people can't regularly take time off. But in order to do this, the organization really encourages speaking up, having that active voice, and they are more than willing to restructure jobs in order to help manage stress. And they also encourage, individual wellness and, making sure that everyone is okay. So my critical analysis, I think Rasmussen has some great strengths. They have work-life balance. They have a great culture that fosters deep connections between employees. And they, again, have that very low turnover rate, which I think a lot of companies are trying to strive for. Some weaknesses, though, is that there's very little, almost no privilege given to seniority. There's low incentives for people, and there is a very small team, which can definitely harm more than it can help. So some lessons that other organizations can learn. Increasing flexibility and lowering strain can reduce turnover in low income jobs. And that's again good at getting into Hertzberg's two-factor theory where, having a good atmosphere and hygiene will actually attract more people and reduce turnover. Another lesson is that senior employees are more likely to display passive responses to dissatisfaction. When I was interviewing my supervisors, I asked them how they felt about the power distance, and they said, it was frustrating, but they're not going to quit. They're not really going to speak up because they feel like there's not a lot they can do to, talk to the chancellor and get that privilege that they need. And so they're just kind of sitting there waiting till they retire and they're happy with their job, but that aspect is just a little bit more frustrating for them. So my recommendations, I definitely am pro increasing power to senior employees. They are clearly suffering from low organizational justice and also, perceptions of fairness. They know some of the most about the library and they don't have a lot of say. And something else, my other recommendation is that there should be more independence for employees and just as an institution. And all of the libraries in Alaska are connected, so it creates issues when these employees from Fairbanks can't control or effectively communicate with outside libraries, for example, UAA or the Anchorage Public Library. I think being more independent would really help these feelings that there's not really a lot that they can do to help. And my coworker insisted that another recommendation is that the library gets its own mascot. So my conclusion, academic libraries, um, while libraries in general are struggling with increasing demands from modern technologies, academic libraries are ahead of the game because they are more accepted by the public with their function as centers of learning. You know, students are expected to, study there and have fun there. Um, Longtime workers are craving independence and higher psychological empowerment, especially with seniority. They crave this increasing responsibility and this want for higher value tasks. And circular structures can create dissatisfaction and lower perceptions of fairness. And I think I talked about this in my discussion post, but it can also create a little bit of political behavior. And I think I can see a little bit of that in um, and again, my senior coworkers who are dissatisfied because they feel like they don't have a lot of say in their everyday life. Thank you guys so much, and I'm very excited to see what you all have to say.